Hey y'all, it's me, Bill Ferriter, and it's time for another 10-minute team tip. Now, one of my favorite graphics articulating the right work of a collaborative team is this one. It's created by a buddy of mine named Rich Smith. And what I think makes Rich's graphic unique is he's taken the 4 critical questions of learning. Those are the gray bars that you see. And he's articulated the specific actions that teams would take if they were answering those questions together. So if you take a look underneath the gray bar for critical question number 1, Rich would say, the first step you take is to identify essentials and unpack it into learning targets. The second action you would take is to provide clarity or develop shared clarity around what that essential actually means. What does mastery of that essential look like? What concepts or misconceptions do students have when it comes to that particular essential? What's the right level of rigor for that particular essential? We build, as Paula Maker likes to say, we become students of our standards before ever bringing our standards to our students. Once we have that shared clarity around what our standards say and mean for our kids, then we start talking about our lesson development. How do you teach that standard? How many days do you spend on it? What kinds of activities do you use to teach the standard? We're trying to study our practice together, and we're trying to figure out better ways to teach important things to kids. So conversations about instruction of the essential are part of the work we do when answering critical question number 1. I was pitching this idea to a team of 7th and 8th grade social studies teachers a couple of years back. And they said something really interesting to me. They said, Bill, we can't do this work together because we don't teach our units in the same order. What do we do if we teach our units in a different order? Or what do we do if I believe we should spend 3 weeks on teaching the characteristics of democracy, but my colleague believes it should be 5 weeks that we spend on teaching the characteristics of democracy? See, this collaboration thing, it won't work, Bill, because we all make our own choices about pacing. That's a really interesting reflection, and I was glad the team noticed that. See, here's the uncomfortable truth. When it comes to your essential standards, you've got to have common pacing. It's a non-negotiable. You have to be teaching your essential standard at roughly the same time, and you need to spend roughly the same amount of time teaching that essential. You also need to give your common assessment at roughly the same date. Why? Well, because if you don't teach the essential at roughly the same time for roughly the same amount of time, and if you don't give your common assessment at roughly the same time, then what's the point of collaborating? You have nothing meaningful to talk about in your collaborative meetings. The purpose of common pacing isn't to take away teacher autonomy. The purpose of common pacing is to ensure that we have something productive to talk about in our regularly scheduled meetings with each other. And what that means is something that sometimes teachers don't like to hear. Teaching your essentials at roughly the same time and giving your common assessment at roughly the same time, it's literally a non-negotiable of the PLC at work process. You don't have a choice, because to do otherwise means that your collaborative work will be completely unproductive. And given how important collaborative work is to the success of students, we can't make a professional choice to opt out of collaborating around essentials. Now, that may make you feel uncomfortable sometimes as a teacher, but I like teaching the units in the order that I teach them in. Or I like spending the amount of time on a particular topic that I've always spent on that particular topic. I don't want to change my order or my pacing for my collaborative team. Here's the good news, and maybe this is the middle ground you're looking for. We don't have to have shared pacing for every single essential in our required curriculum. You don't have to teach every single standard in your required curriculum at the same time as your peers. In fact, I would argue that when we try to have rigid pacing, the wheels fall off of anything that we do. Because what ends up happening is you're so concerned about being in the same place at the same time that sometimes you forget that it's student learning that matters. You're so worried about getting your lesson done because you need to be on day 2 at the same time everybody else is on day 2 that sometimes finishing the lesson becomes more important than did the kids learn it. So we don't need rigid pacing for everything in our required curriculum. That gives you as a teacher a ton of flexibility about how much time you spend on all of the non-essentials in your required curriculum. But when it comes to the essential, we have to be teaching, we have to agree to teach it at roughly the same time. We have to have some shared expectation for how long will it take us to teach the outcome? How many days are we going to spend on this? And we very much need to be giving our common assessment at roughly the same time. Why? Because to do otherwise is to waste your collaborative time. If you're not in roughly the same place at roughly the same time on anything in your curriculum, there's simply no point in collaboration. So if you're a teacher that has ever thought, but I don't like teaching it in the order that my colleagues teach it, or if you're a colleague, or if you're a teacher who in your mind you're like, but I really enjoy a project that I do, but none of my peers do. My answer is you can embrace all of those things. You can still have the projects that you enjoy. You can still teach most of your content in the order that you want to teach it in. But when it comes to your essential standards, there really isn't any negotiation. The small handful of things that you've agreed that all students need to master are things that you also need to agree on when you will teach it, how long you will spend on it, and when you will give your assessment for it. You have to hold true to those things, otherwise you become the barrier to making collaboration a powerful tool for moving people forward. Does that make sense to everybody?